Thank you. I appreciate everyone gathering for an important final step in what is an incredibly important budget process. And so today, I will be taking action on 91 bills. 91 bills that were returned to my desk by the General Assembly after their April 2nd reconvene session. By far the most complicated and consequential in my mind of these bills is House Bill 1600. The amendments to Chapter 2 of the 2024 Special Session Acts of Assembly, where we signed the budget that I affectionately call the Common Ground budget. It was a landmark budget. It included record spending for key shared critical areas, and House Bill 1600 updates that two-year state budget. I think it's really important that we recognize that in doing this, we will be able to provide tax relief, incremental spending in relation to what is a projected $3.2 billion surplus that we established last December. Now, as I shared last March, as we prepared to turn in my amendments to the conference report, Virginia's financial strength enables us to be dynamic. That is a critical attribute of where we stand today. Our financial strength gives us the ability to be dynamic. We understand that as we head into fiscal year 2026, there are short-term risks to that projected surplus. To be clear, I think that there is a real pathway to achieve the 2026 forecast, but we all know that as President Trump rightfully resets trade imbalances and restores fiscal responsibility in D.C., there are short-term disruptions. However, there are real long-term opportunities. And yet, those short-term disruptions, I think, require us to be responsible and not spend 100% of this forecasted surplus today. And that is why I'm taking the actions today that I am. Of the 172 items in the amended budget that were returned to my desk unchanged during the reconvened session, I am approving 135 of them as is. And I will be item vetoing 37 of them. And by item vetoing 37 of them, we will be retaining $900 million of the projected $3.2 billion surplus as cushion. And again, not spending 100% of the forecasted surplus in advance of us actually realizing it. Now, the budget amendments in House Bill 1600 have been built on the same revenue forecast as the one I introduced in December, which projected this $3.2 billion surplus over both fiscal years 2025 and 2026. This budget will take $1.3 billion of that surplus and make strategic investments in shared priorities, bringing our total two-year general fund budget to $62 billion, which is nearly 50% more than the pre-pandemic levels of $42 billion. It's the strength of the Commonwealth of Virginia that has enabled us to provide $9 billion of tax relief during this time period in our administration, and yet record investments in so many areas. House Bill 1600, as I sign it today, will fully fund Medicaid and the Children's Services Act, delivering well over $800 million in incremental investments for direct aid to public education, which will reach $22.4 billion for the biennium, a 50% plus increase over pre-pandemic levels. In this budget that I will be signing today, we'll also take a portion of the projected surplus and deliver approximately $1 billion in tax relief to Virginians, bringing in total the tax relief during our administration, as I said, to $9 billion. And finally, of course, as I described, the budget I signed today will include 37 item vetoes in line with my authority under Article 5, Section 6 of the Constitution of Virginia that will allow us to retain a portion of the projected surplus as a cushion, a $900 million cushion on a $31.5 billion revenue forecast against any risk to that forecasted surplus. Again, not spending 100% of it until we actually realize it. Now, the context of all of this is really important because I am very optimistic in the long-term prospects for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I do believe that Virginia continues to win. Just this week, we saw an enormous contract awarded to Newport News Shipbuilding for the next 2 Virginia-class attack submarines. I had the great privilege of attending a groundbreaking in Chesapeake for a $700 million advanced manufacturing project that is now shovels in the ground and moving forward aggressively. And the prospects for the Commonwealth of Virginia for economic development continue to be robust. However, as we know, the President's actions to reset fiscal spending and to reset unbalanced trade relationships are expected to have some impact in the near term on not only the Virginia workforce, but also, therefore, the revenues that we collect. And therefore, this is prudent, sound budgeting, putting the Commonwealth in a strong dynamic position to maintain our AAA bond rating, to adapt to these potential, although not yet realized risks to the forecast in the short term, and be in a position to take advantage of strong growth opportunities that we anticipate in the long term. I've said it before and I'll say it again, that Virginia's strong financial and economic position gives us the chance to do these 3 important things. Return money to taxpayers, increase funding for the priorities that we all share, and maintain a dynamic position for continued future growth through prudent, responsible financial management. Now, to understand the importance of this action, I'm going to take everybody on a little journey, keeping our eyes on both spending and forecasting. So in December, we projected a $3.2 billion surplus over the existing forecast, $2.1 billion in fiscal year 2025 and $1.1 billion in 2026. That projection was based on actual performance and I think very responsible forecasting. And so when I proposed a plan in December to the General Assembly, it included $1.1 billion in tax relief and $2.1 billion in new investments supported by that surplus, an amount that was on top of what was already agreed in the Common Ground budget, which took us to record levels. By March, the General Assembly had come back with their own budget changes, and it included $1 billion in tax relief, different format, but we agreed on that, and $2.2 billion in new spending supported by the forecasted surplus. They also made some choices that raised some concerns because they substantially increased ongoing spending into the future biennium. So during my first bill review period, while we were ahead of forecast for the 8 months of fiscal year 2025 and on track to hit our financial forecast, potential short-term risks to the forecast, as we discussed, I believe required a prudent set of amendments back to establish this cushion against this very, very large surplus. Virginia is in a stronger position than our neighbors across the river to do exactly this. Just recently, Moody's reaffirmed our AAA credit rating, due not only to our responsible budgeting, but also to the reality that while we do expect Virginia federal workforce to be reduced, and I will repeat, every job lost is a heart-wrenching moment. You all know my family went through this twice while I was growing up, and we know that this is a dislocation not just for those families, but beyond. But we do have a higher percentage of our workforce that's in the military, the intelligence community, and the national security environment. And Moody's recognized that as somewhat of a cushion for Virginia. Meanwhile, as they reaffirmed our strong credit rating, Maryland has been placed on negative credit watch, and as has Washington, D.C. But as I've said over and over again, these necessary federal reforms will create job dislocation for our federal workers and contractors. And the responsible thing to do is first to help them find a pathway to the many, many, many jobs that Virginia has open, over 225,000 open but unfilled positions, to make sure that they get the support that they need between a dislocation in their current job and their next career opportunity, and to support every aspect of that along the way, but also to recognize that the timing of that transition does create a risk to our financial forecast. In other words, we need to create a cushion. We need to hope that the cushion is not used, but we should not spend 100% of our forecasted surplus before it's in the bank. Now, House and Senate Democrat leadership also recognized these potential risks, as both of them launched special committees with the express purpose of understanding them and addressing them. This is why I was surprised that they rejected so many of my reasonable amendments, which just reduced the level but maintained so many of their introduced amendments. And as a result, what they sent me committed all of the money in the projected surplus except for $50 million. In fact, it is that statement that I think requires us to step forward and take the actions today to create this cushion and not spend 100% of this forecasted surplus until we have it. Now, as of the last revenue report at the end of March, we are $85 million ahead of forecast, and we continue to project that we will achieve our fiscal year 2025 forecast. But it is our obligation to look ahead and be prudent and be responsible for our taxpayer dollars, and therefore we need to take some action. The President's efforts, as I said earlier, to reset trade relationships and restore the fiscal sanity in Washington does create these short-term risks, and yes, will lead to longer-term growth. But it is indeed the expectation, and that of the administration, that there is a pathway to success. I believe that they will negotiate better trade deals and that tariff levels will be reduced. I think that will open up new markets for Virginia products, and it will continue to attract significant business investment to America and to Virginia. In addition, the efforts to restore fiscal responsibility in D.C. are expected to result in the reduction in federal workforce and contractors. This is expected to impact Virginia's job level in fiscal year 2026, offset, as I said, by the fact that we have many, many, many open positions in Virginia, 225,000 plus, and we will be protected a bit by increased investment in the military, in national security, and in the intelligence community. Now, with that in mind, I asked the Virginia Department of Taxation to look at different scenarios of possible outcomes for the impacts of some of these policy changes. And while this wasn't a formal reforecast, and many of the Gaker members who we spoke to individually during this period actually expressed a sentiment that if you didn't know what was being projected in the headlines of newspapers, you would expect that things were pretty good based on current data. And the scenarios do show that while 2025 revenue will likely stay on track, that if these risks do present themselves, our projected surplus may be reduced. Again, to be clear, I see a path to meeting the 2026 forecasts. But in these scenarios, given the fact that we have the law of large numbers working here, if there's a 1% miss, it's $300 million. If there's a 3% miss, it's $900 million. These are large numbers, and yet in the context of a $31.5 billion revenue forecast, give us little room if we spend it all. I do believe that providing a cushion of up to 3% against the forecasted surplus and not spending 100% of it before we have it is prudent. Now, the wrong path would be for us to appropriate it all and then for these risks to potentially materialize. That would result in having to reduce spending, or worse yet, raise taxes, neither of which is a good outcome. Of course, that step is constitutionally or statutorily in my authority to cut up to 15% of spending across the board if we're behind in our financial forecast. And I believe that is absolutely the wrong way to go for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Both of the options of cutting existing spending or raising taxes, I believe, are irresponsible and will lead to considerable uncertainty, could damage our credit rating, and make it harder for state and local agencies to deliver services. So let me repeat what I've said. Because we take our collective financial responsibility to the taxpayers very, very strongly, I just want to be clear. We are creating cushion against a forecasted surplus, and yet we are investing an extraordinary amount more than the base Chapter 2 budget, the Common Ground budget, and we are able to provide $1 billion of tax relief. Now, of the $900 million of cushion that we are creating against this forecasted surplus, about $691 million of it comes from one-time capital projects that were being appropriated in fiscal year 2025. The vast majority of these projects are for public colleges and universities. All of them, there's 10, are in the process of planning. And none of them are in construction. And in fact, 9 of the 10 are still in preliminary planning or mid-level planning. And to be honest, my assessment of digging into each one of these individual projects is that this action today will not impair the timing of their planned construction. And in fact, there's work to be done before they could even get there. There is a substantial number, $3.2 billion, of higher ed capital projects already underway, and only $500 million of that appropriated amount has actually been drawn down, leaving a substantial amount of money yet to be deployed in already appropriated projects. I do think that it would be prudent for us not to pile on another $670-odd million into the appropriated but not needed funding balances today. I also want to be perfectly clear that these projects are good projects. They should be funded. And we are providing the General Assembly the opportunity in January to pick them back up. And they will be able to use either cash resources or bonding in order to make sure that these projects continue on their current timeline. In close, let me be perfectly clear. This budget today delivers incredibly important results for Virginians. Of the forecasted surplus, there's $1 billion of tax relief. There's $900 million of the surplus that we're just retaining as a temporary cushion to keep Virginia in its incredibly strong financial position. And that leaves $1.3 billion of the forecasted surplus, coupled with $2.9 billion that we are carrying over from the previous biennium, to support record investment levels in our most important shared priorities and sacred commitments. For healthcare, this budget provides $825.9 million, over $686 million for Medicaid, $100 million for the Children's Services Act, $25 million for drinking water infrastructure, and over $12 million in investments in maternal health. For K through 12 public education, there's $834 million in investments in public education, nearly $223 million to lift the support caps, nearly $111 million for English language learners, $7.5 million to reduce the child care wait list by 7,000 slots, nearly $53 million more for special education, and an additional $134 million to fund much-deserved bonuses for our teachers. For higher ed, building on the $1 billion of investment in Chapter 2 with an additional $235 million over the biennium. For natural resources, $50 million for disaster response and relief in Southwest Virginia, $50 million in non-general funds for the community flood protection, and $50 million for the Richmond combined sewer operation. Friends, thank you for going on this journey with me. I want everyone to fully appreciate the fact that Virginia is strong. Virginia is dynamic, and it is that strength that enables us to do exactly what we're talking about today, to substantially increase investment in these most important priorities, to provide $1 billion of tax relief for Virginians on top of the $8 billion that has already been in motion during our administration, but also to recognize that prudent budgeting requires us to not spend all of our forecasted reserve until we have realized it. We are America's top state for business. We have over $100 billion in capital investment for new and expanding businesses already committed. There's over 267,000 more Virginians working today than when we started, and that $100+ billion of capital commitment underpins another 70,000 jobs that will materialize in the future. We've broken through our goal for 10,000 startups, and now we're at 15,000 high-growth startups in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We stand here with record levels of rainy day reserves. And yes, $9 billion in tax relief, record-setting education investment. Just this week, the announcement that we've had a 44% year-over-year drop in fentanyl deaths to lead the nation in reducing overdose deaths. Our streets are safer. We have the healthiest Chesapeake Bay in over 2 decades, and a port that is the envy of not only the nation but the world. And maybe most importantly, once again, we are a growing state with more people moving to Virginia than to the other 49 states for the first time in over a decade. We are strong, we are dynamic, and we are winning together. And I am honored and humbled that the people of Virginia hired me to the best job in the world, to work with so many extraordinary people on behalf of 8.8 million bosses to unleash opportunity and prosperity in this great Commonwealth of Virginia. And so thank you very much. May God bless you, and may He continue to bless our great Commonwealth. Thank you.